Welcome to the From Zero podcast. I'm Austin,
I'm John.
and we're building a company from scratch in a tough industry. We've raised $750,000 to do it, and we've learned a lot of lessons along the way. This podcast is about entrepreneurship, risk, mistakes, growth, and what it takes to really build something from nothing. And today, we're talking about what it actually matters in the first 12 months of building your business. As always, we break it down into 3 or 4 easy questions, and we talk about building from zero.
Let's overcomplicate the first question. What should founders focus on first? Product, customers, or fundraising?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I've got a couple points that I want to raise before we really dive into the question.
Okay. The questions before the questions.
The questions before the questions. I think it's important to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about and how we're talking about it. So, one, I'm assuming that we're talking about a business that is eligible to raise money.
A startup.
Right? A startup of some sort, right? So not a service-based business necessarily. So I think it's a business that's eligible to raise money. We're talking about a business that's building something, right? It can be a product, it can be a digital product, a SaaS product, whatever, right? But they're building something. They're going to have some sort of intellectual property that people would say, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to invest something into that. Could even be a method of some sort, right? The other part is actually that's the only two. That's like my caveats.
Your caveat. So it's got to be a product, either a real or digital, physical or digital goods,
or a method of some sort,
or method.
Right? Something that they're doing something that other people aren't doing.
Yeah. If that doesn't apply to you, just stop watching.
No, so, don't stop watching.
Don't stop watching. So, with that said, with that caveat out of the way, I guess I'll take it first.
Okay.
Between focusing on product, customers, or fundraising, I think, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about on the first episode on keeping your day job while being able to build what you want. To kind of follow along with that, I think you should focus on product first. You should try to get at least something tangible, something made that showcases your idea one way or another. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be a fully fleshed out product. Doesn't even have to be pretty. But having something you can show will help the other two along, the fundraising and the customers. If you just kind of show up with an idea to begin with, that's great and all, but ideas are a dime a dozen. It's executing on that idea, spending time, effort, and making it come to fruition is the hard part. So I'd say product. That's my vote.
I mean, so I agree with you. And, as with everything, right, there are the caveats, right? This is the right way to do something. However, in certain circumstances, there are other ways to do things as well, right? And I think maybe we talk about those a little bit. So I think, right, in everything that we do, in every aspect of the business, whether we're coming up with an idea to start something new or we are in the middle of a customer interaction or a contract that we're actively building today, right? It doesn't matter what stage of business that you're in. There's one thing that I think aligns everything that we do, and that's reducing risk, right? We want to reduce risk in every aspect of the business, anywhere we possibly can, right? And this is where I think some of those caveats come in, right? For example, if you are a first-time founder versus somebody who has started multiple businesses and had exits, right? Then you may be able to go and raise money or get support for building your product without coming out of pocket yourself, which would reduce your risk.
Yeah, it's a lot easier raising money the second, the third time around. Doing it the first time, that's where most people fail, right? Just being able to get the right contacts to begin with, to be able to get a lot of money in the bank so you can build your product. That's the hard part. But if you made an exit, it doesn't even have to be a giant exit. If somebody invested $50,000 into your first idea and you went around and ended up just selling the intellectual property for it down the line for 300K, you just got quite a good return on your investment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is just you're showing that you have a track record of being fiscally responsible with other people's money, right? You're not out there just wasting it. You're not taking trips to Hawaii or Japan or whatever, right? Like you are spending the money wisely and you're doing it in a way that builds the business. So yeah, I mean, I think reducing risk everywhere you can, and I think if you're not a first time founder, there's an opportunity to reduce risk there. I also think if you're building a product, whatever it may be, right? New founders have a tendency to overbuild, right? So like they put too much money behind something. They spend too much time building something, right? You're shooting for minimum viable product, right? Something that kind of looks like it might work, something that shows that you've put some effort and thought into the product or concept, and shows some basic functionality, right? And then I think that's what you take, and that's what you try to raise money with. Um, but I think founders typically try to build too much. They
Yeah,
put too much money into something. They spend too much time into something. They never know when to stop. They're adding feature after feature after feature because they think that's the thing that makes a difference, and it's not.
yeah. Especially at the beginning, you want to first you want to build. Generally, you want to build a product. It's a lot easier to build a product for a niche that you know very well. So niche yourself at the beginning, and then don't overburden yourself with so many ideas and so many features that the product become this giant monstrosity. You're trying to open up the net so wide that you're the customers that you would have gotten are kind of turned off by it because okay, now it's really complicated. Like, what does it actually do? What is it meant for? And we've seen that a lot especially in like SaaS type things, but even hardware, something as simple as a module that's meant to record telemetry. All of a sudden now it also okay. Well, we wanted to also record airspeed, but we also wanted to act as an autopilot, and you keep adding, and now you're starting to compete and jump into other spots that there's already a defined product in that area, and you're not really niching your market. You're broadening it up too much.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of introduce what we built and use a real world example.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We didn't talk about it on the first episode, so we can talk a little bit about what we're working on now.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think we have to go too much in the weeds, right? But what we've built is a Group 3 141-pound unmanned aerial system with a 14 and a half foot wingspan, right? And with a system like that, there's so many things that we could have done, right? There's so many payloads that we could have integrated. There's so many cameras that we could have tried to add and cram into this thing and show different capabilities of all this stuff, right? But we didn't do that, right? We built a base minimum viable product. We didn't even fly it before we started raising money, right? We just built it. And I think we could have went so much farther and spent so much more time and so much more money before we started raising. But I think we understood that this shows the overall capability, right, with our aircraft and our communication system that we have built from the ground up. We knew it was time to stop and raise money.
Yeah, and I think we had a general idea of what we wanted to stick with and which was kind of our primary goals. And one of those primary goals was to make the system very affordable in relation to other systems in the market that we were trying to build. So when you have that mentality to begin with, you're thinking about building it differently. You're trying to build things that can do multiple, like you can get multiple features out of a lower amount of money, a lower amount of hardware. And you're also simplifying the process, because if you can simplify it at the beginning, it means once you start building to scale, it becomes a lot easier and a lot less expensive to scale. So
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit a good point there that it is maybe it's something we can talk about without really getting too far off topic. But I've heard this 100 different times, over the past 10 years, and people say, don't build something to compete on price, right? And we didn't necessarily set out to compete on price alone, right? Like we had a unique angle that we were taking, but we knew that we also needed to compete on price, right? Because every system, without going into detail, is kind of overpriced, right? Like they're everybody's asking for premiums. However, if we want to talk about price and price alone, I think that we've had some innovations kind of come out of our development process because we were competing on price, right? Like there were some easy buttons that were more expensive that we could have, if we weren't competing on price, we probably would have went that direction.
yeah,
Right. So the fact that we went into this knowing that we were going to compete on price created some innovations that brought out unique parts of the platform that would not have existed if we weren't competing on price. And I only say that because I've heard a lot of people say don't compete on price, but I don't think there's anything wrong with competing on price.
and it depends on the market that you're in. You don't want it to be a race to the bottom, but when it's a market that is a very high priced market and it's starting to turn and the customers are starting to be more price conscious and there's no alternative to those high price ticket items, that's where you can start competing on price a little bit, because you know the competition, there's not that much of it out there and they're all very high on price. So if you can bring down the initial cost, you can still end up making the same percentage per system that those big guys are doing. You're just being a lot smarter about the components, the layout, and overall what you're building compared to them.
Yeah, and I think even in the smaller markets, right? Let's say you're building a SaaS product that you're going to sell for, I don't know, $39 a month, right? Even if you're not competing on price, I think being price conscious, is kind of it's important through the development process, because I think it can also span or create some of those innovations, right? Because I mean, let's look at something simple, right? There may be a way to do, let's say, an integration for a specific thing on your website through an API that costs, I don't know, $10 per thousand uses, right? And if you are price conscious and you do the math and say, okay, well, that's really going to eat into my profit margins. So rather than just using a commercial off the shelf API, like we're going to spend a little more time and build this database or build something in-house that we can use, and also maybe potentially create our own API that we can sell in addition to this thing, right? It kind of flips the script a little bit.
Yeah, if you can build, if from the start you kind of have scaling and future sales and you're looking at it as like, oh, this thing is going to blow up, and you kind of go into it with that mindset to begin with, a lot of the stuff that you build on the ground floor can really help you save time and money and help you on the ability to scale further on. Same thing with, in our case, like the manufacturing processes and things like that. It's something that people don't think about too much, especially on the first couple of sets that they're building. But you should kind of keep it in the back of your head. Like, hey, this, if it does blow up right now, will I be able to scale it successfully, or am I going to have to be playing catch up and potentially lose out on a bunch of revenue and potentially go? You only have, even if you get an investor, you only have so much money. If you got to spend a whole bunch of it going backwards and fixing issues, you might not be able to actually grow it and scale it, and you might run out of money before you actually make it. So
yeah, the money goes fast.
Money goes very quick.
Yeah. So kind of back to the original question, right? What should founders focus on first? Product, customers, fundraising, right? I think we agree, right? It's product first, then fundraising. However, customers kind of fit in there, right? I think if you're gonna raise money, right, like you're gonna have to show some sort of traction, some sort of demand, right? Maybe that's where the market research comes in. Maybe that's where the, testing your product idea on a small scale, or you're gonna have to either have already sold or show that there is a demand for that product in some way, right? So maybe the correct, I guess, series here is product first, customers, right? Showing some sort of demand in some way. And then once you have that, then you can go and raise money.
Yeah. The customer piece is pretty tricky because if you get lucky enough, if you get enough customers, you get enough traction, you don't need to fundraise. It might make sense not to fundraise, keep more of your own company in. But if you want to scale quickly enough and kind of blow it up, to say, fundraising is the biggest accelerator. An influx of cash helps with everything. So
yeah, and it, I think it all really comes down to what you're building, right? I mean, a lot of people, some people may not want to fundraise, and even if you do want to fundraise, maybe it's not the best path for you to take if you don't absolutely have to, right? In my mind, when I think about a startup, I'm thinking of people that are building something that probably costs so much to build that it would be kind of impossible to do it on their own unless they had, $500,000 or something of their own money to invest, right? And I think that's true. I mean, for a lot of products, you talk about even an early stage social media platform, right? You're talking millions of dollars to build, right? I mean, it's just expensive.
Everything ends up always being more than what you think it is. And kind of going back to our example, you end up at the beginning, the napkin math idea, right? You kind of end up, price always comes in hand, but if we sell it for X and it should cost this much. And then little things that you would think would be very cheap end up, in our example, was it the small solder connectors or the small crimps for wiring, just tiny little pieces of
just
crimp.
to crimp a wire together. They're $2 a piece, and the tool to use it was $500, right? So you build one wiring harness and you're in, $2,000 in just crimps, right? And then that doesn't even account for the things that you're going to screw up, right? You may spend $20,000 to build something and then have to rebuild it from scratch, right? Because it doesn't align, things change. It no longer aligns with the vision. It doesn't work the way it was supposed to. Your contractor didn't do it correctly, whatever, right? So you're going to end up redoing a lot of things that you've already done.
And you'll end up, you can, whenever you're building something, you're not going into a mine harvesting copper and building your own electronics from scratch. You're buying piecemeals from everywhere, and one of the big issues, especially on the tech side, is obsolescence. You build an entire system around this one inverter that you need in order to change the electricity to where you need it to be, and all of a sudden that inverter is no longer sold. The company went out of business, and now you have to change your entire schematics and everything to go about it. It's a huge issue that people don't think about too much. They're like, oh no, I can just buy this, it will work.
Yeah.
Every single component on anything that you're building It's been a huge kind of life lesson for both of us. Any component that you're building, always think about if this component was to disappear right now for whatever reason. It can't be imported from Italy anymore. The company in Ohio stopped making it. Whatever. What is your alternative? And if
Right.
you don't have at least one or two alternative for every single one of those components, you are going to be in for a bad time.
Right. And, and today, even if it doesn't go away, right? Today, there could be a component that you can buy off the shelf and it ships tomorrow. And in 6 months, there's a 12-week lead time on that exact same component, right? And that hurts business. When you think you can deliver something in 2 weeks and now you're 3 months late because you couldn't get a single thing, right? A single little component, whatever it may be. um, that affects your business. It all affects your business. And I don't think this is strictly a physical product problem either, right? If you're building online, right, you're using off the shelf, APIs, you're using databases, you're using all these things that all make up your primary product, right? And any one of those could go away at any time, right? So
Right.
if you build your entire SaaS product around one API and that API decides we're not open to the public anymore, or we are going out of business and filing bankruptcy, right? Now your whole business is done. You have to start from scratch.
Yeah. Try to bring, if it makes sense, obviously, try to bring what you can in house. It's a big one. If that way, at least you have some control of it, and have multiple backups for it. Obviously there's a lot of things you won't be able to bring in house. You're not going to be making your own microchips. You're not going to be making your own lenses.
Right.
Obviously take that with a grain of salt. But there's a lot of small things that, especially if they're overpriced and they're very niche. An example would be like a special inverter that's going from two different voltages that are not very common. So a common one could be $10, but there's only one guy in the mountains of Tennessee that is making it, and he makes 30 a year, and he's charging $500 for it. Might make sense to just build that in house.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that you use, right, regardless of what kind of business you have, everything that you're going to use and buy commercial off the shelf to be part of your overall system, whatever it is, I think the conversation has to be had in every single thing that you're going to buy of, can we build this in house? Should we build this in house? And if we can't, then what other options are there out there?
Yeah.
Which, I think based on where we're at in this conversation, it might make sense to skip the next question and go straight to number 4, and then we can kind of come back to 2 and 3, because I think this falls right in line with that question.
Yeah, and it's a good question. It's if we had to start over today, year one, what would we do differently? I think there's quite a few. Luckily, well, not luckily, but this isn't the first time we've had to start over.
Right.
So we've gathered a little black book of lessons learned throughout our different endeavors. What's the biggest one for you? What's your number one kind of biggest lesson learned that you would do differently?
So for me, the biggest one, and the reason that I thought it made sense to jump to this question, and I have the note right here: do more in house, less contract support. And we can kind of talk about that, right? Like we, 3 separate, pretty large contracts.
Sizable, yeah.
Yeah, three pretty sizable contracts that we outsourced to develop the different systems of our aircraft, and pretty much all 3 of them had their issues, right? But one of them turned out pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
A second one is okay-ish, but we still think that it might have been one cheaper, and two, we probably would have ended with a better product had we just done it in house. And then three was one that was almost the most expensive, the second most expensive. It took the longest, and it was complete garbage. And we had to rebuild the entire thing from scratch by ourselves because it was so bad, right? It didn't meet really any of the requirements. And I think, if the other note that I have here is to go full time sooner, right? Because so you're going to be faced with all kinds of decisions as a new business. And one of the decisions that we made was to try to stay full time employed longer to kind of reduce some of the risk that comes with starting a business. To do that, we had to outsource these three contracts, right? So these kind of goes hand in hand. Had we decided to take two of these contracts and build in house, one or both of us would have had to go full time sooner. However, the amount of money that we spent on these contracts, we would have had the funding to do that.
Yeah, it was definitely it was a huge learning because on previous endeavors we didn't really rely so heavily on contract or at least these extent of contract work. My biggest learned slash lessons from that in particular was you kind of got to be an asshole to these contractors. You have to make sure that the contract you're drawing up, one, don't sign their contract without changing things.
No,
The contract should hopefully be made by you or from your end. You're the one paying for it.
Unfortunately, we did that, right? We created the contract on our own and covered almost every possible thing that we could cover. And there were still things that popped up in the contract that it's like, crap, we should have included that.
Yeah. At any point, when you're kind of drawing up these contracts, first, if the money allows, get somebody that specializes in making these types of contracts to help out. That would be huge. If you got to build out the contract on your own, definitely do a lot of research and kind of think in the back of your head that this person's trying to fuck you. And if
what is every single thing that could possibly go wrong from a technical standpoint, a personal standpoint, right? What happens if the contract, like, is it a single contractor? Is it a huge corporation? Like, who you doing a contract with, right? Like, what happens if the person doing the contract gets sick? What happens if his wife gets sick, right? What happens if his car breaks down, right? All those things can affect contracts.
Yeah, and we should have we started doing that with the one that went pretty bad. We started doing that one a little bit towards the end. I think we did it a little later of also enforcing the contract. Keep everything documented, emails, calls, everything that you can document, and write it out in a way that does not leave it open to interpretation. If they're late, write up a nice email. Maybe not nice, but write up an email saying, hey, via this clause of the contract, you're 2 weeks late. If you do not provide X product in the next 2 weeks, this will fall into the cancellation clause, yada, yada, yada. Whatever it needs to be, but be very kind of switch on the legal hat earlier. If a person's, especially if you feel like the person is giving you the go around, because everybody's going to come up with excuses for why they can't do this, can't do that, why they're late, but just be the asshole in the room.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to anything that you're outsourcing, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Don't get into decision paralysis, right? Don't sit there and weigh the pros and cons of everything and make no decision and continue to let the contract either, underperform, be late, whatever the issue with the contract is, like don't let that continue on, right? Take some kind of action, document it often and early, right? And put it in writing, and start working towards a cancellation clause. Because at the end of the day, if the person doing the contract, I mean, if you're 30% of the way through the contract and they are still kind of jerking you around, they're probably never going to do great, right? And I mean, that's kind of what happened with us, right? We ultimately closed the contract in a amicable way because we didn't want to deal with the legal issues, right? We paid the money and then we took what progress they had made and rebuilt the whole system by ourselves.
Yeah. Which kind of brings up to the next point, and it's something that I've seen that we do a lot, and maybe some other people do a lot. Don't underestimate yourself. It's there's especially now it's 2026, the time of this recording. There's a lot of info out there to do just about anything. There's stuff that we just weren't comfortable fully doing ourselves, and we're like, hey, this person probably knows better on it, and turns out no, the person is a complete idiot.
Right, their smoke and mirrors is pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And several of these things got outsourced because we thought it was kind of above our level and we wanted to get an expert to do it. And, a quarter way through the contract, we're like, what the fuck are they doing? This makes no sense.
The expert's an idiot.
Right? The expert's an idiot.
Yeah. And it's one thing to be said is that nobody's going to care about your things as much as you are. So
all they want is paid. Everybody wants paid.
Everybody wants money. Everybody wants a little. If you get a little bit of money, everybody's going to want to take some part of it. All of a sudden, they know everything, and
people will take advantage, right? People, I mean, for example, right? One contract, somebody tried to charge us for a product that had been documented that was part of the what's the best way to articulate that? Basically, they said that they would include this complimentary as part of the contract if we awarded them the contract, right?
Yeah, and then once the payment came through, they're like, then there's a line item for it.
Right, then all of a sudden there's a line item for it, and we're sitting there like, this doesn't make sense, right? So they try to take advantage of us, and we had to kind of take action on that to get it removed.
Yeah.
And then, on another contract, right, a vendor tried to charge us I believe it was $38,000 that we had already paid, right? Maybe it was an accident, maybe it was on purpose, but it doesn't matter, right? Like they sent us an invoice trying to get us to pay $38,000 that we had already paid. And had we not had, great accounting records, we might have paid it.
Yeah.
So you just can't trust.
No, people are slimy when it comes to money, especially when it comes to large amounts. You gotta be careful who you get in bed with. Everybody's gonna try and dig into your pocket and take a little bit out, and people are gonna. It like for some reason the most confident people seem to. I don't know where they get this confidence from, but because they're clearly stupid. But these very confident, like, wow, that person seems to know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And then they just, I think you mentioned in the first episode, but you can only bullshit for so long. I think
6 months.
6 months before it kind of falls apart. And just be very wary and kind of really dig in, do research on what the contract what you're trying to build actually requires, how hard it actually is, because it just might make sense to build it in house, or at least build it in house to the point that you're eating up 50 to 70% of that cost before you have an expert analysis on it or a third party analysis on it. Obviously, have your work be double checked, but it you really want to know what you're building, and the best way to learn is by building it, and
Yeah,
then
and
afterwards you can kind of cross check it.
yep, and nobody's going to have your vision, right? I think it's one of those things that even if you don't build it in house permanently, right, you can build in house to your vision, right, and then take your creation to somebody and say, "This is what I want recreated over and over and over," right?
Yeah.
And I think, and again, I think that's something that's true regardless of the industry. Nobody's going to have your vision. Nobody's going to do it like you would. Nobody's going to care about it as much as you. Um,
And people are not mind readers. That's been everything I've seen on different jobs, different projects of even like building websites. It's so hard to communicate and articulate and write down what you have envisioned in your head, that the person building it, even if they're trying to do the greatest of jobs, it's never gonna come out how we don't have the ability yet to
Mhm.
project what's in our brain in a three-dimensional space in front of us for somebody else to see. So what's the closest thing is build something as close to that vision as you can, even if it doesn't work quite how it's supposed to. That's gonna make it so whoever you give the project to, it's gonna be like, okay, I see what they're trying to do. I see the vision, because
Yep.
that's the hardest part. It's trying
Without
to communicate it.
something like that, you're always going to be disappointed.
Yeah,
Almost always.
and reel in your expectations. Definitely start reeling in your expectations whenever you go to get some kind of third party to do any sort of any part of your product, because most of the 90% of the time you'll be disappointed. I mean, there was that third contract, the one that went good, that turned out to be a lot of the opposite.
Yeah, and and I think you have to go with your gut in a lot of cases, right? So we had this conversation about these three specific contracts several times, right? Like we knew these three contracts were things that would be large parts of our development process that would have to be done, right? And through our conversations, we said, look, one is something that we could potentially build in house, right? We had never done it before, but we've done a lot of research on this thing. We've watched a lot of videos. We've kind of done little test samples, right? It's something we thought we could do, but weren't 100% sure, right? The second one, and the one you're talking about that went great, that's one that we looked at and said, we 100% have to outsource this, right?
Yeah.
Like we do not have the technical skills to be able to do this and recreate this thing. Uh, like there's just no way, right? Like we
But
have to outsource this.
but to be fair, on that second one, and it kind of goes back to the previous point. It was the only one of the three that we already had something built that person could go off of
Right.
as a proven concept. Granted, it was very early. It was ugly, but the
It wasn't
concept
that ugly, but yeah.
physically it was pretty. But once you started kind of diving in, it was
Yeah, the code base and stuff that we had written and put into place was not great.
yeah, it was
It
like
worked.
a kit car.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. From far away, if you squint, you're like, "That's a Lambo," and then you get close, and it's got a little four
but
cylinder.
you're right. That one went great, and it was the only one of the three that we had, that we had kind of an early product to build off of, or I guess as an example of what it would be. Right. We had a minimum viable product for that.
Yeah.
The second one we didn't, and then the third one we really didn't need at all. Right. Like it was done more so because the intent behind it was to speed up the development process.
Yeah, it
And
did
and
quite
it
the
and
opposite.
had the contract stayed on track and on time, there's a possibility that that could have happened. because at the end of the day, right? Like money can speed up everything, right? And that was the attempt that we were trying to make. We were trying to speed up the development to get to our minimum viable product sooner as the whole system, so we could raise money faster. And it was supposed to be a 12-week contract, and by the time we hit 12 weeks, the contractor hadn't even started, right? And
Yeah.
it ended up taking what, 8 months,
Yeah,
and
it
we
was
still had to
ridiculous.
redo it. So
Yeah.
it was just a huge amount of wasted money. There was a couple good things that did come from it, that probably we wouldn't have come up with or found on our own, But at the end of the day, it was still a huge waste of money.
Yeah. And it's funny because in the startup world, the money and time buckets are kind of intertwined because there's periods where like you need something done by a certain amount of time, so you have to throw money at it to meet that deadline. And then there's periods that you need to stretch the money out in order for, because the next timeline is long, is further away. So it's kind of a graph of sprints. Where you spend a whole bunch
Mhm.
of money, get things done fast, slow everything down, make your money stretch, go to the next sprint.
Yeah, and that's you just kind of hit another note that I had on this same topic about things that we would have done differently. One of the notes that I had, so we raised money, right? And the way we raise money is our connections went out to all their people to start pulling funds in, right? And it was kind of piecemealed, right? We allowed them to kind of take their time because we didn't want to raise more than we needed at a
Mm-hmm.
low valuation, right? We wanted to get to that next phase with as little money as possible so we could raise the valuation and bring in some real money and keep as much equity as possible. Um, but, right, what that did, piecemealing that money, um, it really slowed things down a
It
few
did.
different times, right? Like we got to a point that there was a couple things that we really needed to do, and we had to wait on that next wave of money to come in for that, right? So we lost months and months a couple different times. So I think one thing I would do different is rather than piecemealing, I would set a value and try to raise in larger sums, right? All at one time.
Yeah, especially because the eh, for what we were building and anything product based is there's a lot of upfront cost, especially if it's hardware related. There's a lot of upfront cost, and things have, like we talked earlier, things have lead times. So you're spending this big chunk of money right away, and then kind of have to wait for the things to arrive, and then you spend a little bit of money getting some things fixed. But if you don't have a large enough chunk of money to begin with, and you can only buy two out of the three hardware pieces that you need, that's the same as buying none
Right.
because there's only so much you can do until you have everything you need.
Yeah, and I think to put it in perspective, right? Maybe we don't use a real example, but we use an example that can be put into dollars and cents, right? If you need to buy A, B, and C to complete a project, right? And A is, let's say it's $1,500 and you can get in 4 weeks. B is, $30,000 and has a 12-week lead time. And C is $5,000 and has a 16-week lead time, right? And in most of those cases, right, you have to put a down payment. You either have to pay 100% up front or you have to put a down payment to buy the thing, right? So if you don't have money to buy all three of those, it's like buying none of them, right? Because you can't do the project without them. And the expensive one, right, is probably going to have, let's say, a 50% down payment, which is pretty common with what we've seen, right? And until you can pay that 50% down, the clock doesn't even start, right? So
Yeah.
we're not talking, if you get $15,000 today, you can buy B, right? No, you can put down a 50% down payment and you can start a 12-week clock that's going to get B. and then more than likely they're going to be a month late, right? So, and if you don't have that money on hand to pay those down payments to start those clocks and those lead times, it's like you're just sitting there doing nothing for months and months. And when you do finally get the money, you still have to wait another 3 months.
Yeah, because there's a lot of times that with especially with electronics and things like that, there's a whole bunch of spec sheets and things, and it becomes really complicated when you're building a unique product because the specs and things in those COTS, commercial off the shelf things that you're buying, they're not tailored around what you're building. They're tailored around whatever the most common end use for it is. So you can do all the research in the world until you have it in front of you, and you end up putting things together. That's when you start running into issues that you hadn't even accounted for.
Yeah, I mean we've waited 3 months on a product, all for it to get here, and us look at it and say, "Well, crap, we can't use that." Right? It happens.
It's common, and you start learning early on what are the possibilities and kind of asking the questions. And it's you have to be positive about what you're building, but you also have to think a part of it from a sort of a negative point of view too, as in, okay, if this doesn't work, what is the alternative? If this doesn't work how I envision it, how can I make it work? And it's hard to do, especially when it's something that hasn't been built before.
Yeah, which, if you're raising money, there's a chance that you're building something that hasn't been built, or you're building it in a way that hasn't been done before. So, yeah, trying to see if I have any other notes. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And honestly, we're at almost an hour here already. I don't know that we have time to cover the other 2 points. I think we need to break it into a separate episode.
Yeah. So, as the trend continues, we hit 2 out of the 4 questions, and veered completely left on most of them. But hopefully, we got some really good info and a little bit of insight as to what we were building ourselves, and some real applicable lessons learned here.
Yeah, and I think in the future we'll try not to get too in the weeds, right, about our specific application. Because I don't know if I don't know if people will like it or if it'll be a turnoff or what. I guess time will tell.
Yeah.
But in the next episode, right, at minimum, we're going to cover. Let's see, what are these questions? What early stage work feels productive, but is mostly a waste of time? And then, how do you know if you have real traction or just activity? And I think those are 2 kind of important topics. They don't. I don't think they'll take as long as these, so we may add 1 or 2 more in addition to that. So next episode will be episode 3, but we'll call it part 2 of episode 2.
Coming soon.
Coming soon to a theater near you.
Bye, chat.
Bye, chat.